Well, as I mentioned in our opening, as I first reflected on these particular scriptures, with each one having the imagery of the tree planted by the waters, my attention was really drawn to the trees. As a native Oregonian, certainly trees are very important to me. Our native Douglas fir, the beautiful oaks that we have throughout the Willamette Valley, and of course, the fruit trees that many of us enjoy throughout the year, the fruits of those, and especially during the harvest season in the summer and fall, the cherries and pears and peaches and apples. This is indeed a very fruitful region. And thinking about those trees makes us think of the interconnectedness of life, that the life of the tree is sustained obviously by the soil in which it is planted, by the air, the sun, the water that nourishes it. And we enjoy the many benefits of trees, helping us to breathe more easily through the exchange of carbon dioxide into oxygen, the beauty, the shelter that they provide to us and through other creatures and wildlife, the products that they provide for us for construction and paper. So the many, many benefits of trees that we enjoy. And again, in the scriptures today, we can certainly hear from Jeremiah and from the psalmist the description of the one faithful human who will be like a tree planted by the water. And then in the book of Revelation, we clearly hear the reference to a tree as an expression of God's life given for the common good of all creation. For the trees, the leaves of the tree will be for the healing of all the nations, and the trees will bear fruit throughout 12 months, throughout all seasons and cycles of the year. So clearly, the tree is intended for the well-being of God's whole creation and a vision of beloved community, of shalom and wholeness, of harmony between the many aspects of God's good creation. And as I said earlier, as I spent more time reflecting on this, particularly this last week, my attention was drawn more and more to those streams of living water, the streams of healing water, the streams of calming water that we also hear throughout the biblical imagery. Our attention could move to the story in John's gospel when Jesus finds himself alone at the well, and a Samaritan woman, a foreigner, comes out in the heat of the day to draw water, and he asks her for a drink. And she, of course, balks at this and questions, "Why are you asking me, a Samaritan, for a drink?" And he responds, "Woman, if you only knew who it is who's asking you, then you would ask them for streams of living water that will never run dry, that will be ever flowing, that will slake your thirst forever and ever." So these are the kinds of streams of living water that God's beloved offers abundantly to all those who turn and follow him. Again, we've been looking during the season of Epiphany, the season between Christmas and Lent. We've been looking for ways that the light of God's word, born in our midst, the light of God's love, helps shine a light onto things that are hidden or out of view. I'm reflecting on the fact that many times God's love or sustaining power is perhaps just outside our frame of reference. It may be there all the time, but we may only become aware of it at times when the light of God's love particularly shines on, illumines that which is hidden and brings it into view, brings it out of the darkness and into the light. I can recall working as a chaplain, both in hospice and hospital. And one of the questions I would frequently ask a patient or a family member going through particularly difficult times, I would ask them, where have you turned in the past for a sense of comfort or solace or succor? Where have you found refuge, or what have you drawn upon to help get you through difficult times in the past? And oftentimes that would come with an immediate positive response. Sometimes it took a lot of patience before someone could begin to identify. I think of one patient who couldn't think of anything until finally it was that imagery of her grandmother holding her when the patient was a very young child, her grandmother holding her close to her, rocking her, comforting her, something that I can certainly identify with as a grandparent now. But how helpful it was for her to reconnect, to reestablish that connection, to be able to remember and review that kind of loving care surrounding her. It's very, very easy, and particularly in these COVID times in which we've been so much disconnected, isolated, quarantined, distanced. It's very easy to feel the sense of disconnection, of alienation, of divisiveness, of separation, and how draining and exhausting that can be. And I want to remind us of the hope that there are possibilities all around us. God's own Spirit and God's people in whom God's Spirit lives are all around us. And sometimes we kind of get our blinders on or our shutters over the lenses, and we can't recognize that loving support that is all around us. Now, last week, I shared with you the concept, the principle that it's all about relationships. And that's long been my understanding for my 40 plus years I've been involved in various kinds of ministries, that it's all about the relationships. I believe that in theory to be the case. And today I want to celebrate with you that more than just in theory, but in practice, we are finding this to be the case. Many of you may remember that about a year ago, we were just launching an intensive mission discovery process that lasted about 3 months, close to 3 months, last March, April, May last year. And that a lot of that process was about building relationships within our congregation, of deep listening and reflecting to one another, to God's word, God's scripture, and applying it to our lived situation, but certainly building a lot of relationships among us and seeking God's guidance to shed light on how God may be calling St. Paul's into new relationships with our neighbors. Many of you may also remember that Reverend Josh Kingsley co-led with me and was kind of an accompanied us. He was an accompanist who journeyed with us throughout that mission discovery process and did so very ably and very lovingly. Following my sermon today, I'm going to ask Elizabeth to share with us a video that she very skillfully helped to put together for us. Josh's work with us last year was funded by a special grant, a Vital Ministries grant from our Columbia District Church Extension Society. Columbia District Church Extension Society extends the work of the church, the mission of the church, among and between and beyond Methodist congregations in our Columbia district. Some of you are no doubt aware that we received a loan last fall. In August, September, October last year, we received a loan to help cover some of the out-of-pocket expenses for parsonage repairs, new roof, new siding, new painting, etc. So a lot of that came from St. Paul's own funds, from endowment funds, from reserve funds, from funds that you yourselves helped to contribute last year. But there was still that $25,000 or so of unmet expenses, and we borrowed that money from the Columbia District Church Extension Society. So just in the last year, we've had multiple benefits from our relationship as an individual congregation with a group or a cohort of United Methodist congregations that make up the Columbia District. And the Columbia District Church Extension Society is that body which administers both loan funds and grant funds. And St. Paul's has benefited in a number of ways through the years, and especially this past year. What I especially want to highlight today, again, are the quantity and the quality of the relationships that coming together, working with Josh, working as a congregation to reflect together on how God is calling us into mission, how that's helped us to both deepen and also broaden relationships within our congregation, and now much more so as well beyond our congregation. It was great that maybe 20 or 25 of you each week last year participated in those weekly sessions. So well over half of the folks that typically show up here online on any particular Sunday morning for St. Paul's worship. So it was a great participation. Some of you may recall that on one of the very last of those Mission Discovery weeks, we had a guest presenter, Anna Hosley. Anna, whose work is also supported by the United Methodist Church, Anna, who's one of the lead organizers with our Clackamas County Land and Housing Coalition. And Anna shared with us sort of the process of beginning to have conversations one-to-one with each other and then with our neighbors, and how that can begin to build a sense of relational connectedness that we could map together, almost like a spider's web or a network of relationships and connections, and how life-giving those can be. In fact, how they can be like that stream of life that feeds and nurtures and grows the life of the tree. And so today, I want to share with you kind of an updated image of this relational network map and show you a bit more of the ways in which I had hoped and believed that growing relationships would indeed help bear fruits for St. Paul's Church and for our ministry in our community. How, in fact, I believe those are bearing fruits, that now it's gone from theory to practice, and now we're experiencing some of the fruitfulness of those relationships. So I hope now to share with you a bit, if I can find the right controls here. Let's see if we can go there. Give me just one sec. Oh, there we go. Okay, so a year ago, this was really kind of theory, and now hopefully this is more the practice, and I will share all this with you subsequently, because I know some of you are on your phones and you probably can't see this very well at all. I will just kind of briefly introduce some of these aspects and then share it with you. We can share it tomorrow as a document to go out with the weekly update. But here we find kind of a series of concentric circles in the middle, beginning with St. Paul's UMC, worshiping, nurturing, serving community. So that's kind of the heartbeat of the church. Here we have an expanding circle of church members, of church constituents, of church supporters. What just happened? I pressed the wrong button. So kind of growing concentric circles, right? Expanding outward. And again, you might think of like a spider's nest and how it expands out with those beautiful gossamer threads that are all connected to the one larger network. And then in this next circle, we find Friends of St. Paul's. We find public and private partners. We find partner organizations, and we find faith partners. Up here on what is screen left, top left, I've listed there some of our United Methodist connectional partners, the district, the annual conference, the Greater Northwest, and the global. And then I have here a list of congregations in our areas and just the first name of some of those church leaders that we begin to collaborate very closely with. So when Josh Kingsley worked with us last spring in March, April, May, there was just on the horizon, there was a far off possibility that he might interview for a position at a church close by to us, which is King of Kings on Tyson Road, kind of close to Rose and Carroll over there off of Webster and Tyson Road, between Webster and Oatfield Road. And sure enough, before we concluded our mission discovery process, Josh was invited to become the full-time pastor at that church, the King of Kings Church. Many of you, of course, know Oak Grove United Methodist Church and Pastor Heather, who is there. I've done a little bit of color coding here. So the red is United Methodist. The greens, the kind of pine greens, those are the Lutheran churches. And I just want you to notice something we have here in terms of our partner churches. We have one United Methodist Church, Oak Grove, and then we have King of Kings, Storyline, Creator, Milwaukee, and Prince of Life Lutheran churches. So in other words, where there's one United Methodist, there's 5 or 6 Lutheran churches. The Lutherans have really got it going here these days. And among those leaders, besides Josh, we also have 8 other congregational leaders who we're currently partnering with. And that's Anna and Sarah. That's Story and Juliana. It's Debbie and Jesse and Janelle and John. Now, again, these are just the first names, but the reason I'm doing this is to let you know about these strands of interconnectedness, these relational ties that are growing. And then, again, as many of you are aware, last fall, St. Paul's began dipping a toe in the water and has progressively become more involved with the Land and Housing Coalition. That's on the left-hand side of your screen in kind of the maroon color there. And Julia Nielsen, who was the pastor at Portsmouth Union United Methodist or United Church, Portsmouth Union Church in Northeast Portland near the University of Portland, and how they're now building accessible, affordable housing, particularly for veterans on their church property. And how last summer then, Jules transitioned and now she's working full-time. Her pastoral appointment is full-time with the Land and Housing Coalition in our larger Portland metro area, Multnomah, Washington, and Clackamas counties. Jules plays a very important role there in helping to kind of connect all of us together across this larger Portland metro area. And then just below Land and Housing in the kind of bright blue there, the North Clackamas School District, Lot Whitcomb Elementary is first, and the names of the social worker behavioral specialist Annie and Counselor Brooke that Amy Merrill and I just had an important conversation with recently. So Annie, I might have misstated that, Annie and Brooke. The Wichita Center with the food pantry, with family resources, with the volunteer coordinators, and that includes Kathy and Katie. Some of you know Kathy, some of you know Katie. We know that kind of our legacy connection was with Linwood Sojourner Elementary. We have the Milwaukee Community Center, the Meals on Wheels program there. We have veteran support services that have been meeting here at St. Paul's in years past. And then finally, the 12-step recovery groups that have begun meeting again, and I'm sure there will be more soon. And then just below that, a group that may be new for most of us, Metropolitan Family Resources or Metropolitan Family Services. And the names there of Matilde and Patricia, who are both Latinx women who work in North Clackamas School District, serving children and families in our school district, particularly here in sort of this corner of the school district in the Milwaukee High School area. And there's more that I won't go into all those partnerships right now. But the reason why I wanted to highlight these particularly is that last week I spoke about some special new opportunities that are opening up for St. Paul's to be in relationship with the staff, the students, the families at Lott Whitcomb Elementary School. And as I'm looking out here toward the east, towards Linwood Avenue, I know that it's just about a mile farther east of us, over towards 82nd and Winco Foods Lott Whitcomb School. We found out this week they have about 380 students at Lott Whitcomb. That it's, as a student body, it's one of the poorest, one of those that's been most affected by COVID, one that has a very high number of families that are eligible for free and reduced lunches, one that has many, many different language groups, and probably the highest concentration of Spanish-speaking students in the entire North Clackamas School District. But what I really want us to focus our attention on for just a moment is, what does it mean to be beside? What does it mean to be planted beside the waters? Now, in this case, we could see St. Paul's as the tree. We could see God and God's Spirit as the waters that are planted beside us that enrich and enliven us with abundant life as Christ's body here at St. Paul's. And we could also think about that differently, is which are the trees around us that St. Paul's is next to? How might St. Paul's be the embodiment of that abundant water that feeds and nurtures and resources those trees that are planted beside us? So what if we think of Lott Whitcomb as the tree and St. Paul's as the stream? What does it mean for us to be streams of living water? And again, particularly the importance of relationships. You know, programs and projects and plans are all very, very important. You know, buildings and budgets and structures, those are all very, very important. But as I said last week, my experience is that it all comes down to relationships. Ultimately, it's about the relationships. And what I want to call your attention to here is the way in which it's these relationships with other congregations up here in the top left, these relationships with other congregations and congregational leaders in our immediate area, our partnership with them in the Land and Housing Coalition, and in other ways that's happening on an ongoing basis. It's those relationships that open the door for the growing relationships with these folks down here at Lott Whitcomb. And that's just a very, very practical matter, because when I reached out on my own to contact school leaders at Linwood Elementary and at Lott Whitcomb, I didn't get any response. It's not surprising. Everybody is super busy. Everybody is overwhelmed. You know, it's totally understandable why, if you're too busy that you can't begin to respond to all the requests, why would you respond to somebody you never heard of before? But when Pastor Heather from Oak Grove, and when Debbie Stromberg, who's the leader of kind of the Interchurch Youth Collective, when they contacted the staff at Lot Whitcomb and say, we think it would be great for you to get to meet some of the folks at St. Paul's, they would love to get to know you. And suddenly the relationship was born. So it's all about those relational connections. And here is the proof is in the pudding of the ways in which these relationships are growing and deepening, so that as we hope, we expand our presence and our rootedness in our holy ground, in our sacred ground around us. So too, we can provide some of that nurture, some of that refuge, some of that succor and resources to our neighbors around us. So it's a flowing back and forth. It's a mutual reciprocal connectedness. And that's what I'm most celebrating. And there's more here again on this relational networking map that you all can delve into. And as I said, I'm going to be sharing this with you in the weekly, so you'll have a chance to take a look at it. In a few moments, we'll be sharing a video with you as part of our grant from the Columbia District Church Extension Society a year ago that helped us to fund Josh Kingsley's work with us. They've asked us to submit a brief video kind of report highlights back of some of our experiences and how those funds were used. And so Pastor Josh was very gracious and generous with his time recently. And again, thanks to Elizabeth for putting this together for us. But just asking Josh to reflect on what differences he notices at St. Paul's between last year at this time, before we began the mission discovery process, and now a year later, after going through that mission discovery process, and now our participation in the Land and Housing Coalition. I should have put in on the map and I forgot to do so, but just to name names for those of you who aren't aware, St. Paul's is actively represented in the Clackamas County Land and Housing Coalition with these folks who are part of our church core team. That's Dave Smith and Amy Merrill, Lois Spitzy, and Linda Cook. And some of you know Diane Rios, who for a few years was a resident here at the Parsonage Sadaka House. Last summer, she moved out and is now in a place of her own nearby. And she is very graciously, very actively participating along with us in our core team. And so we have a really robust and talented group of folks who meet for about 75 minutes once a month with Pastor Josh and representatives from the King of Kings core team. And then another 90 minutes or so each month with the full coalition of representatives from all the churches that are listed here. So maybe there's 30 of us or so on those calls. So again, various interconnectedness, interwovenness of these relational connections. And as we'll hear later, many have said in my hearing, how wonderful it is to know that we're not alone, that we're connected in this time of great isolation and disconnectedness. We are really experiencing and embodying something different, the interconnectedness. It's quite lovely. I'm going to stop sharing this for a sec. And then I just want to quickly show you one more thing. And really want to express appreciation for Amy Merrill and her husband Scott, who helped us with this, which was just kind of a way of helping us to visualize some of these possibilities of ways that we might reach out and connect with the staff, students, and families at Lot Whitcomb. Let's go there. Oops, I just have to get the right button here if I can. my buttons are covering, one's covering up the other. There we go. Oh, there we go. Okay. So just great thanks again to Amy and Scott, who helped to develop this little graphic organizer for us, this little visualization. And these were some of the needs that had been identified in discussions with school staff. And then we spent time this past Tuesday at St. Paul's Governing Board, just kind of further discussing some of these. And we've kind of ordered them on the document that we've shared back with the school staff, sort of in terms of feasibility. And here, down here at the bottom, the snacks for students and books for library are two of those that St. Paul's folks as a couple of the most feasible. They seem most doable, most within our grasp to go ahead and do those things, hopefully right away. And then in addition to those things, we also have, here we go, volunteering needs. So in addition to resource needs, we had volunteering needs. And some of those include like spaces for people to meet. And we've talked about how and where groups from the community and who are affiliated with Lott Whitcomb, and especially some of the immigrant and those who don't speak Spanish as their first language, how they could benefit from having some meeting space here at the church. Talked about parent mentoring and more traditional kind of school volunteering, which as people become comfortable, as hopefully COVID continues to wane, as folks are vaccinated, that maybe those opportunities for mentoring in things or for volunteering in things like reading, math, lunch buddies, tutoring, et cetera, that those opportunities will open up more and more. So these will continue to remain in front of us. But again, even where we may be doing project-based activities like tutoring or mentoring, just remember that even though we may feel like, well, I don't know what's needed, that it's really about the relationships, that it's in some ways, the practical need is more like the doorway, the window, the gateway into the relationship. And when it comes to relationships, we really can't fail. When it comes to relationships, it is simply, opening our hearts, opening our lives, relating deeply. And what we do know for certain, all the science tells us that when anyone, especially students, especially young people, have undergone multiple traumas in their lived experience, crisis or trauma, that one thing that can make more difference than anything else in the world is to have at least one caring adult who pays attention to them. At least one caring adult paying attention to them. That can make all the difference in the world in terms of the well-being of somebody who's been through a series of traumatic experiences. I also happened to find a map this week that I'll share another time that kind of categorizes the level of vulnerability to COVID based on a host of factors like income and housing and transportation and population density, access to healthcare, et cetera, et cetera. And it's very interesting that here in this part of Clackamas County, the part that shows the greatest vulnerability to COVID is pretty much overlaid on the Lott Whitcomb attendance area. So again, we can see a lot of these interconnected vulnerabilities. So right now I'm going to pause. I'm going to ask Elizabeth to share the video with us in just a moment. And what I want you all, and again, we can share this with you again if you want to go back and view it or listen to it again, but I just want you to pay attention to what rises up in you in response. I know for me, there's a really lovely, deep sense of gratitude for the partnership and the companionship with Josh. That's what I find rising up, is this welling up the sense of gratitude. But just kind of pay attention to what rises up in you as you listen and view the video. And if somebody who's not here today, somebody who knows something about the church, or maybe somebody who knows nothing about the church, If they were to ask you, hey, what's happening at St. Paul's these days? That maybe this video might give you some ideas that you'd like to share with others. So what rises up in you? What do you hear and see that's happening at St. Paul's these days? And thanks again to Elizabeth and her family's collaboration for our video now. And I'm going to remove my spotlight and mute myself.
Early in 2021, a Vital Ministries grant from the Columbia District Church Extension Society provided funding for St. Paul's Church in Milwaukee to hire the Reverend Josh Kingsley to co-lead a mission discovery process with Pastor Marshall Watman Turner. More than half of St. Paul's active members participated in the 10-week-long series, which ran from March to May.
So Josh, you've been in a unique position to observe some of the steps that St. Paul's been taking over this past year. So could you reflect a little bit for us, like what have you noticed about things that have been happening at St. Paul's in our mission discovery and community engagement journey?
It's exciting to see what's happening at St. Paul's now. I see teams of people who are strategically engaging in one-to-one conversations within their church community and beginning to expand that out into the broader community around them as they continue discerning their mission, their next steps, both in the small, concrete, specific next steps, and then the larger vision of what could this group of God's people be up to together. Something else that's been really exciting to see at St. Paul's recently is they're really becoming a leader in bringing other churches together to do joint program and joint mission. So a big example of that is this coming Lent. We're going to all be doing the Eco-Faith Recovery study together, tying in with Randy Woodley's book, Becoming Rooted. And that's something that St. Paul's was really at the foundation of organizing. And it's the relationships that they've built with each other inside of their church, and that they've really started to build with these other partner churches, Oak Grove United Methodists, Milwaukee Lutheran, King of Kings Lutheran, etc., that have enabled all of us to come together more and begin to explore even the larger than just church mission, but like the county-wide mission that we have together. And thirdly, I would echo what your folks are saying that I hear at my place too, which is that it's really nice to know that that we are still part of something larger. The congregation can become so inwardly, it's really easy for it to become so inwardly focused, that it's nice to remember that we're all just branch locations of one movement of God.
And it seems like there's a lot of encouragement and strength that can be drawn from that collaboration, and I think gives us courage that we can have a larger vision than just what we can see from our own immediate perspective.
Yeah, and I think reflecting back on when we were first spending time together, when this whole project started, I'd say that's a relatively large shift from the kind of conversation and just the options that St. Paul's felt like was in front of it.
Yeah. Well, anything else you'd like to add that I haven't asked about?
Just, as now a fellow Clackamas County colleague, a lot of gratitude that St. Paul's is here and that they are part of our collaborative team. It wouldn't be nearly as much as fulfilling, the work around Clackamas County, without you all. So thank you.
Thank you.
In the fall of 2021, St. Paul's joined the Clackamas County cohort of the Land and Housing Coalition, which was a natural next step in the church's journey toward community engagement. After the Reverend Kingsley became pastor at King of Kings Lutheran Church south of Milwaukee, collaboration between the two churches has blossomed, interweaving St. Paul's Land and Housing Corps team with King of Kings, has opened more opportunities for cooperation between multiple congregations and points of connection with our neighbors.